Thanks very much, Tanya. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the warm welcome from all of you. I'm really excited to be here today to present and to talk about this subject that is really, really important to me and important to everybody, quite frankly. Open data at DOL has been something that's really helped the agency in a lot of different ways. And I hope that at the end of this talk, we'll all be in agreement that open data is something that we're willing to take on and worthwhile. So a little bit about me before we start. First of all, can you see my screen okay? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Epic. Okay, so we're going to advance here. So a little bit about me. I was born in a little island called Trinidad. It was part of a twin island republic called Trinidad and Tobago. And at 18, I moved to the US with my mom and my brother and stepdad. So at this point, I've been in Washington, Thurston County the whole time. It's a wonderful place to live. I love Washington. I love Seattle. I love Thurston County. Go Hawks. I'm a big fan. It took me a long time to understand football, the American football, as opposed to football that I grew up with. I was the senior auditor at one of the bigger credit unions in Washington State. And then I moved into IT and I've been doing all sorts of stuff for IT since then. I consider myself a humanitarian, and quite frankly, just about everybody here probably falls into that category because we care, right? We care about people and what happens to the world and what happens to humanity. And open data is kind of a great opportunity for us to address that, to help, to better humanity as a whole. And hopefully you'll understand that a little bit more as we move through this presentation. So I want to talk about my role at Department of Licensing as the analytics manager. It's really simple, quite frankly, but it evolves into a lot of different things. Basically, we're looking for all the business data that's available that's of any value. We're going to grab all that business data. We want to analyze it. We want to make sure it's of high enough quality to use. And then we want to transform it into insights that people can then use to make decisions. So for example, when COVID hit and we were trying to figure out what services we needed to address right off the bat and how we might be able to do that and who might be hurting the most, data was really, really critically important to us. And I'm sure all of your organizations can identify with that. When things happen that are not expected, we need to look to our systems and look to our data to figure out what's changed, how it's changed, and how we might be able to make best of the situation. So then we want to talk a little bit about open data and what it is before we go too far, because a lot of people assume that everybody understands and we're all on the same playing field. And I don't want to make that assumption right off the bat, especially as at the beginning of this month-long effort to talk about open data and data and the importance of all these things. We want to make sure we're on a level playing field. So open data, first and foremost, is freely available, the open part, right? So somehow we're going to find a way to deliver the data so that everybody can get to it. It's accessible by everyone. And a lot of people opt to present open data through the internet, right? Through a web page or a website. And that you need to be cautious about that because not everybody actually has the internet still. We're only sitting at 90% penetration for households that have internet right now. So we're not actually reaching 100%. That's something to consider. But by and large, it's reaching the vast majority of people. And there are a lot of efforts, I think in King County even, to make the internet something that is available to everybody. You can go to the library and access it and all that good stuff. And last but certainly not least, open data needs to be informative. When someone is able to access that, they need to be able to make sense out of it. And so we start getting into things like metadata that describe what you're looking at when you're looking at the data, all very important. So that's basically what open data is. But really, we don't want to stop there. We want to go a little bit further. We want to talk about how the data is constituted and we want to make sure that people can get the most use out of it as possible. So then we start talking about standardization of the data. So we want to make sure that everything is as expected, so that a one here might mean the same thing as a one over here. We want to talk about it being machine readable, because sometimes our data is ingested by other systems and other processes, and they use that on a routine basis to create other things. So you might present something one way in January, and if you change the way that you present it in February, then those people that have designed their processes around January's format, they have to recreate things for February. So it doesn't really work when you're trying to reach the masses. And last but certainly not least, it needs to be described. So when people ingest your data, they know exactly what they're looking at. So now that we understand what we're talking about with open data, I want to take you back to Trinidad for a little bit. This on the left is my grandmother. Everybody calls her mom. Everybody in the neighborhood calls her mom, which is interesting. And on the right is my aunt, Lorna. So my grandmother and my aunt have these amazing abilities to foresee weather changes. And my grandmother would famously say, "Oh boy, the arthritis in my knee is really acting up. It's going to rain. It's going to rain heavy." And sure enough, it'll rain, and it'll rain heavy. So she would actually use that to determine when she should water her plants, and if not, because if it's going to rain. My aunt, on the other hand, she owns a house that overlooks the Gulf of Paria. It's a beautiful view from her back porch, and she would stand on her back porch, and she would say something like, "Boy, you feel that breeze? You feel how cold that breeze is? It's going to rain, it's going to rain." And sure enough, it was going to rain. So, I grew up relying on my aunt and my grandmother to tell me when it was going to rain, so I can plan my day. And that worked to a certain degree, but ultimately in the long run, that they couldn't really foresee things very far ahead of time. So fast forward to today, when I'm thinking about what the weather is going to be, I do what most everybody does: go out to some website and I look up the weather. We can get like a 5-day forecast, we can get a 7-day forecast, and it's usually pretty accurate. Not always entirely accurate, but certainly they can tell you a lot more than what grandma's knees or my aunt's nose and senses in the breeze can say. And this is the real value, right? So when you think about this site that I'm showing you right now is weather.gov, and it's an open data site, really. It shows what they expect for the weather for all the different areas, and you can drill down, and it actually uses data from NOAA, which is another open data site, to create the forecasts. And by the way, you might go to weather.com, which is actually a site that's commercializing the information from NOAA and weather.gov. So you can see that open data not only provides a lot of information to a lot of people, but it also kind of drives innovation, and people can use it to create more businesses downstream that would provide, again, more services to people. Here's another really awesome example that I came across just recently. I was in Hawaii a couple of weeks ago, and the picture on the right is a picture that I took on the North Shore on Sunset Beach at sunset. Awesome experience. If you ever have the opportunity to go. So I took that picture and I was just enjoying the sunset, and I looked behind me and I saw this guy sitting up above us on his, I guess, back deck, you would want to call it. And we got talking, and he mentioned that he had been married on his property there a couple of decades ago, and he was married there about 200 feet into where the ocean was. And within the last 5 years, the tides had really changed, and erosion was a real problem there. So as I looked, if you look at the picture on the left there, they have these sheets that kind of cover the the sand, and that's meant to protect the sand from erosion to a certain degree. In his house, which you can barely see on the left there, on the left picture, his house, half of it, by the time I was talking to him, had already slipped into the sand, and he was sitting on this small sliver of a sandbank that was now his backyard. So, he started talking about what had happened and what the government was doing and the feds were doing about it. And I thought at that point, wow, this is pretty amazing that he has so much information on this. And how does he have it? Well, he has it because of NOAA. He has it because of a whole lot of open data. He has it because of a lot of work that is being done in collaboration with a lot of different people. And all that information is made available so that other people can continue that work. So from there, you can really, really tell that open data has a major benefit to him and to everybody who is sitting on North Shore and wondering if their property is going to exist. He mentioned to me that his neighbor had just recently sold his property for over $1 million. And he said, looking at the forecast for it, I think I'm just going to ride it out. I'm going to stay there. So he was able to make an informed decision based on open data. And so was his neighbor. His neighbor decided, based on what they were seeing, that it wasn't worth it, that it could sell. And he decided, based on what he's seeing and what he knows and what everybody's studying, that he was just going to stay. So that's the decision that was made, an informed decision because of all the data that's available. So when we talk about the benefits of open data, we talk about we're thinking about the ability to give the public insight into what we do. We're talking about the people that are making decisions about what they're going to allow on the shores of North Shore, on Sunset Beach, and why they're making these decisions, and they're making that publicly available also. We're talking about the effects of the ocean in this case, it getting warmer, and where the effects of rain. The rain in Hawaii is it's becoming more intense. So when it rains more heavily, but it doesn't rain as often. So that creates the potential for flash flooding and all those things that really change the landscape and affect the earth a lot. And really, as we do all this, again, it's empowering people to make informed decisions. So when you think about your ability to provide open data, I want you to think about people downstream that might be positively affected by it. You can't even imagine the number of ways your data is going to be used. So you just need to know that it is way more valuable than you can even imagine to a lot more people. So I want to talk about our whys, because this is something that people don't spend enough time doing. At this point, I want you to think about who your customer is. And I want you to think about what you are providing to your customer. So your product, and your product might be a service, right? But essentially your product. And at that point, I want you to think about, where is the greatest demand and why? And how well you're meeting the needs of your customers. Because ultimately, if you exist for something, you're going to want to know that you're doing a good job. And so will the people that are paying your bills and making it possible. And I want to go back to Trinidad for a little bit and talk about the snow cone man. So this guy, it wasn't actually this guy, but this is a file photo. There was a guy outside of my primary school, and he would be there almost every lunchtime and after school. And he was there to peddle his ware, and his ware was a snow cone. I don't know how many of you have had a snow cone or seen a snow cone. It's basically shaved ice with syrup poured on top of it. I'm curious, actually, if you can put in your chat if you've had a snow cone or seen a snow cone. I'm really curious how many of you have.
Looks like at least 30 to 40.
Wow, that's actually pretty impressive. So I see that snow cones have made it to the US and some of the areas they have snow cones in the summertime. While in Trinidad, it's summertime all the time. So this guy was pretty much a staple at my primary school. And one afternoon, I was waiting for my parents to pick me up. School gets out at 3, and I was there almost to 6 o'clock. And I was used to waiting, but not used to waiting that long. And the snow cone guy was still there. He was still sitting out there. There weren't a lot of customers, but he was still sitting there. And he motioned to me and had me come over and just gave me a snow cone. And that really made a big impression to me. It was like it made me feel not so alone. And well, I was thirsty because it was hot, so there was that too. And that snow cone guy stayed there until almost 6 o'clock when my dad showed up to pick me up. And I think about that every now and then because I think about as we think about purpose and I think about his actions, it really informed me at that point as to what his purpose might have been. Because if his purpose was to make the most sales and get out of there, he wouldn't have been there at 6 o'clock. If his purpose was to make the most profit, he wouldn't have been there at 6 o'clock. His purpose had something to do with protecting these kids and making sure that they had whatever they need. And that's why he was still sitting there and making sure that I was safe until I was picked up. So you really have to think about your purpose because your purpose defines how you define success, right? It decides how you define success. So when you start to measure things and when you start to make things available through open data that might be used to measure your organization's success, you want to think about your purpose and you want to put things out there that align with your purpose, your organization's purpose, so that people can truly see how well you're doing and measure things accurately. So before I launch into open data, DOL's open data journey, I wanted to take a moment to answer any questions that there might be. I am not able to see the chat. So Paul, if you can help me with that, do we have any questions at this moment?
There are no questions for you right now, Sadeeq, although there are at least a couple of Hawaiians who said, aloha, shave ice. And one shout out from Philly about water ice.
Nice. Okay, we'll move ahead then. So DOL's open data journey started in 2016. And right about that time, the governor of Washington convinced everybody and actually create a requirement for all state agencies to create open data plans and move towards publishing open data. We realized as a state that it was really important and we wanted to do something about it. At that time, DOL gathered a couple people and we thought about it and we didn't really know a lot about open data, but we decided we'd create a plan and the plan was to get something out there. And between 2016 and 2017, we got 5 reports that we found that we thought people might be interested in. And we kind of pushed it out to data.wa.gov. And that was a very, very humble beginning. The reports were PDFs for the most part. I think we converted some of those so that they could be uploaded in some of the format, but it was essentially a PDF report. Was it informative? Probably. It was freely available for sure because it was on data.wa.gov and accessible to everybody, but in reality, it wasn't standardized, it wasn't machine readable, and it certainly wasn't described. These were reports that made sense internally, but not externally. And that's something that we really needed to address. In 2018, we decided we wanted to make sure that all of DOL, as we were learning about open data, understood a little bit about open data also. And so we wrote a couple articles and posted it on the internet. And then we established a work group. We grabbed people from all the different areas and said, hey, you're going to be part of open data, and you're going to be part of open data, and you're going to be part of open data. And so they showed up to these meetings and we said, all right, let's get stuff done. But in reality, we didn't assign any resources. We didn't give them time to work on open data. So these were people that would just show up to the meetings and go back and do their job. And ultimately, the work group wasn't really accomplishing a whole lot. And I'm going to bet that some of you have experienced this, where open data is just something that you've been assigned to do along with your regular duties, and you don't have the time. That's an unfortunate reality for so many of us. So one of the things that we learned at that point is we need to set aside some time. Whoever we give the responsibility of open data, we also need to give them the ability to do it, the time to do it, and the resources, whatever resource might be needed to do it. In 2019, we decided to take a totally different approach. We realized that open data was something that was kind of a little bit technical, but you need to understand the business. You need to understand what's going on in your organization, what's important to your organization and to your customers. And then you need to translate that in a data form so that people can have access. So we created an open data Scrum team, and Scrum is a wonderful way of managing a product, open data being the product in this case. And it's a great way of managing resources also. So we assign specific number of hours to each team member for each sprint to work on open data. And that was a very successful thing. So from 2019 to present, we've been pretty productive, I'm happy to say. So we took a look, we started by looking at all the open data offerings, and we realized that we had some work to do. We got rid of all the outdated things, because another thing that we realized is that it's one thing to post open data online, but you also need to maintain it, because this data, it becomes stale, it becomes irrelevant unless you maintain it. So we created a little process to do that. And then we started looking at definitions and realized that we needed a little help with definitions. And last but not least, we took a look at the presence of PII. So one nice thing about open data is when you do this work ahead of time, you don't really have to worry about the presence of PII. But because we just grabbed some reports and threw it out there initially, nobody really looked at what was in the reports and whether or not it could be shared openly and should be shared openly. So we found some data that was PII, but technically was able to be shared publicly because it was related to businesses. But we decided as an organization that we didn't want to do that. We don't want to share a social security number, for example, just because it happens to be the person owns a sole proprietorship. In this day and age, with the ability to reconstitute PII and to link all these different data sources, we just need to be really, really, really careful about what we share and how we share it. So we moved that part of the analysis about the data that we present in open data. We move that ahead of everything now. So as we're thinking about what we're going to prepare, we're going to look at all these different things and make sure that nothing that's questionable in any way makes it out to open data.
Excuse me, Sadeeq, if you're open to a question, Rodney would like to know, what was the demand that compelled DOL to publish open data to the public?
Guess what screen we're on right now? We're going to talk right about that. So in 2019, when we started things over, we took a look at all of the public disclosure requests that we were getting. We took a look at all the data requests that we were getting. We looked at every question that was coming in that was answered by data for the agency, and we found that there were some high value data sets that we could create, or that we could publish, at least publish parts thereof. And that's kind of what drove where we would go next. So we discovered that there were a lot of vehicle and driver requests, a lot of questions like how many Civics are out there in this area, how many red this ones are out there, things along those lines. Those were very, very common. We were spending a lot of time answering those questions. And then we get other questions that were more complicated, questions like information for transportation benefit districts, or the utility companies might want to know something. A lot of cities and counties were interested in the way that their vehicle population in their area was changing over time, because things like electric vehicles impact other things like your utilities that are now responsible for powering these electric vehicles. Everybody's plugging in their electric vehicles that time. They want to know how many electric vehicles are coming in and that they need, that are hitting their grid. So when we took a look at all the requests that were coming in, we decided that the two things that we wanted to really focus on were the vehicle population, data for the vehicle population, and the driver data. So things like how many drivers are in whatever area, maybe a little bit about the driver record, like how many people, let's think about it, how many people might have endorsements for motorcycles, things along those lines. So hopefully that answered your question. Do we have other questions at this point?
I don't see any at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So also in 2019, we had a couple of laws that really impacted the way that DOL looked at vehicles, in particular electric vehicles. We had one law that passed that allowed vehicles that were that achieved a certain level of efficiency to receive an exemption. And we had a couple new laws that talked about the fees that were going to be applied to electric vehicles, because they're not using as much gasoline, they're not supporting the highway infrastructure to the same degree that a fully gassed vehicle might be. So the second law was kind of engineered to deal with that a little bit, to just give a little bit back for their use of the road that wasn't being captured through fuel tax. So what that meant to DOL was that we had to figure out a little more carefully what electric vehicles were out there, and we needed to be able to publish the list of models that were qualifying for the tax exemption, which was something that was really, really important to a lot of people. So manufacturers were calling us all the time, making sure that their vehicles were going to be on the list. We had people that were trying to buy vehicles, that were trying to figure out which vehicles they would be able to get the exemption for. Dealers were trying to make sure that they were doing the right things when they were collecting sales tax for all their vehicles. And we were inundated with requests that were related to this. And we thought, well, we have this open data thing. This is a really excellent opportunity to use open data. So we use data.wa.gov as our avenue through which we could publish this list and maintain this list. And at that point, we thought, well, everybody has all these questions about the electric vehicles. It's part of that vehicle data set that we identified, and it's the most asked about aspect of our vehicle population. So let's get some stuff out there. So we created at that point a few new data sets that that captured electric vehicle purchases, well, not really purchases, but titling and the registration of them. And also we are looking at where the population of electric vehicle and hybrid vehicles are, so that people can figure out all of that. Another thing that happened with electric vehicles at that point was Department of Transportation was trying to figure out the electric vehicle highway. So basically, if you have an electric vehicle and you want to travel through Washington and actually through Oregon and a couple other states, they wanted to make sure it was possible. So wherever there was a lot of electric vehicle travel, or the locations of the ownership of electric vehicles, they would want to develop a charging station network that would support the use of electric vehicles. And as you know, at this point, that was a great success. Kudos to DOT for all the work they've done on that. But they used a lot of DOL data to figure that out, because they need to know where all the vehicles were. So that need was met through open data, and that was our first big win. Really, it was something that all of DOL's management team could look at and say, okay, well, now we understand the value of open data. Now we understand why we might want to push all this stuff out. And that paved the way for our future efforts since 2019 to keep spending time and resources towards open data. Do we have any questions at this point?
Thanks, Sadeeq. We do. We have a couple. The first
Okay.
from Paul um, refers back to public disclosure. Have you found that open data increases or decreases DOL public disclosure requests?
Open data certainly, most certainly has decreased our public disclosure requests. There are a lot of questions that are answered through open data that never make it there now. And there are a lot of questions that are posed of DOL that we're able to then say, yes, we can tell you that. And here's how you can self-serve that and any other subsequent questions you might have. So one of the things that happens a lot of time with public disclosure requests is a person might ask a question, and then when they finally get through the public disclosure request process and they get their answer, they have a subsequent question that has to then go through the public disclosure request process again. It's time consuming, it's laborious for a lot of different areas, and we were able to kind of take that off the table by saying, hey, you have a question about EVs, electric vehicles, here's all the EV data, have at it, and we'll show you how to use it if you need help, which doesn't happen that often, quite frankly. It's pretty intuitive, and that's all there is to it. So we were able to shift a couple dozen, 3 dozen, I think, a year, a request that actually come to DOL, and then we just forward them to Open Data to solve it. But the vast majority of people that used to come to DOL to ask about EV are already aware that the electric vehicle data is out there, and they're able to self-serve. Does that
Thank
answer
you.
your question? Okay.
And the second question from Tamara is, have you been asked for real-time open data via web services like Washtop provides? And if so, what data is being asked for?
Oddly enough, the real-time data that's been asked for has been on special plates. When they launched the Seattle plates, the Seattle Seahawks plate, and the Sounders plates, that was something that they wanted real-time data on. And we spent a lot of time at that point providing it manually. We did not have the infrastructure at that time to provide that. So we haven't provided anything in real time since then. And I don't know that there's a need for us right now. Most of our stuff is refreshed on a monthly basis, and that is sufficient for our customers to the extent that we know. And on this point, I want to mention we have a nice new channel through data.wa.gov through which our customers can then get back to us and comment on the data or talk about additional needs or nice to haves. And we get messages from customers routinely, regularly, and where we've been able to respond to them and to change the way that we grow the product to better meet their needs in the future. So it's a really nice avenue through which we can talk to people, and it also helps us to refine our data. Also, we on occasion we'll have somebody respond and say, "Hey, did you know that this Ford F-150 is being listed as an electric vehicle? I really don't think that's right." And we go in there and we can say, "Yeah, well, they made like half dozen of them electric," or we could go in there and realize that something might not be quite right, and if it's a problem with our data that we get through other sources, we can communicate that up the stream too, so that they can fix their data sources. So it's something that really works for us to help improve the quality of our own data, and also to meet the needs better and as the product evolves.
Thank you.
So, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, Sadeeq. There's one more question from Carrie Sahak. What has been a surprising benefit and a surprising challenge on your open data journey?
A surprising benefit. I think the whole team was really pleasantly surprised to hear from LinkedIn, because LinkedIn used one of our data sets as an example of a well-constituted open data set. And they were in a class that was teaching open data and the use of open data and the value and of all of that. So that was a nice one. And I forget, what was the second question? I'm sorry.
Oh, a challenge.
Challenge.
Surprising challenge.
Oh, all of it is a challenge. Really, one thing that one point that I want to make sure that everybody gets is that the vast majority of the work associated with open data is analytics work. that really should be done for your organization ahead of time. So as an organization, I come back to what your why is, right? What your purpose is. You want to make sure that you're fulfilling your purpose to the greatest degree that you can. And to do that in today's world, you need to look at the data. You need to figure out to quantify uh, your level of success that you're experiencing. So the biggest challenge has been figuring out um, what information is of the highest value, extracting it from our systems, and packaging it for consumption by all the different mediums uh, via open data. So, and a lot of that work again is analytics work. 80 to 90% of the work that we do is driven by the organization's need for analytics, the need to have the data available to make decisions. And that 10, 15, 20% of just packaging it and making sure it can be consumed by the public, that's well worth it. And I think that's one reason why a lot of organizations might shy away from open data, because they think, look at how much work it would be to create this data set to put it out there. Well, yeah, but the vast majority of the work is work that you should be doing already to make sure you know what's going on in your organization, so that to make sure you can make informed decisions, to make sure you can respond to unforeseen needs and changes in the environment, in your business environment. You have to do that work to be successful. So open data is just that small piece to get it out there and to package it right.
Oh, wow. Well, um, great job on the recognition from LinkedIn. And there's definitely some agreement about doing the sense making on the data. And the last question I see in the chat at the moment is, what would you say were the biggest barriers to posting open data, and how did you overcome it?
There's a lot of fear. If you think about, airing your dirty laundry, like, oh, well, what is somebody going to find that I didn't find? That's one big thing. And as a public agency, we don't want to put anything out there that really reflects badly, poorly on our agency, on state uh, government as a whole, on the work that we're doing. But the reality is, as long as we have again that analytics piece that's functioning properly, what you're going to find is that you're delving into that data, you're figuring out what's going on there. You are making decisions to improve the way that you're doing things. You're actively doing that. And only after you're actively doing that are you at that position where you can actually, package things for open data. So by the time it gets to open data, your management team's already seen it. Your management teams already had the analysis done on the data, and you're already planning and you're already implementing changes to improve things. So when people come back and they go, hey, did you know that this such and such was really low? Yeah, we knew that. And here's what we're doing about that. And on the rare occasion where somebody brings something up that you didn't see, you thank them. You thank them and you bring it to the management team and you act upon it. So really, it works. It's a positive thing if you implement it that way, and if you think about how you're going to deal with this data before you just push it out there. If you build an open data program that's just standalone, where you just generate a bunch of data and put it out there, yeah, you're going to run into trouble. But if you build an analytics program where you're ingesting all this business data, you're making you're creating insights and you're acting upon it, and then you're putting data out to open data, then that's all going to work together to make everything better. I don't feel like I answered all the questions. What was the second part?
That was primarily the answer. What was the way to overcome the barrier? And it sounds like you faced it and took a new approach. So
Yeah, and I'm watching the time, but we can talk. I can talk all day about this. If anybody wants to reach us, I have my contact information at the end of this presentation, and you can feel free to contact our team. But one of the things that people were really concerned about with open data was privacy, right? We don't want to put things out there that jeopardizes the privacy of our residents. And so we, as an organization, decided that there's going to be nothing that is of any that is related to PII that's going to make it out there. So the only thing that we're going to put out there is aggregated data, and you won't be able to zoom into any one car and make sure and find who owns the cool new supercar that you saw on the street. You can't do that through our data. What you will be able to see is kind of like how many supercars might have been sold. You might be able to see something along those lines, but you won't be able to narrow it down. So we spent a lot of time making sure that that was the case and convincing our management team that we're going to turn over every stone ahead of time to make sure that that information, PII, is not shared through that medium. And that in turn helps public disclosure because they can send any requester out to open data and say, hey, use whatever you want out of there, because we know that we did the work ahead of time to make sure that what's shared through open data is something that anybody can access and it's not going to put anybody at risk.
Oh, that's tremendous. And now the questions floodgate just opened. Couple of comments. We love the idea that open data is a natural outcome of overall healthy data management. And Tony says that, Sadeeq, you work with and lead a great team of people. I'm sorry, team of great people. What sort of knowledge, skills, abilities, or experiences help build a successful open data program?
That's a fabulous question. It's been really interesting. Analytics in general, the field, when it about 10 years ago, the common idea conception was that we had to hire these data scientists that knew everything about everything and could make everything. And there are a few people out there that can check all the boxes and do all these different things. But the reality is data scientists that can function to that degree are few and far between and in super, super high demand. And it's not realistic to expect to find somebody who can do all aspects of analytics and pushing things out to open data. You're not going to find one, and you're not going to retain them, even if you did find them, because the demand is so high. The other reality is that if you were to find somebody, by the time they understand your business to the degree where they could be effective, they're going to be gone. So we took a little bit of a different approach. We looked at all the skill sets that might be involved in analytics and involved in generating open data and creating a sustainable open data team. And then we went out and we looked for individuals that had aspects of that. So we have some people that are really great at integration. We have some people that have decades of knowledge, of business knowledge, that understand exactly what happens in the field and how it translates to what we're seeing in the systems. We have people that are really, really excellent at communicating and spend a lot of time working with all the business areas to figure out what their needs are and how we are able to best able to meet their needs. We have people that are awesome at GIS. We have, I don't think there's any one recipe. I think that one thing that you really have to do if you're in the position of being a hiring manager is to understand where your strengths and weaknesses exist in your organization right now. Go out there with an open mind, and really look at everybody that you're considering and look at what their strengths are and think about how their strengths could benefit the team, how their presence would impact the effectiveness of your team and of your organization, and then choose from that. Choose based on that. I never go out and say I want to have a GIS specialist. I think ahead of time if I'm hiring, I think, yeah, it would be nice to have this, or it might be nice to have this, or it might be nice to have this. And I asked for those things. I said, this is what the preferred qualifications become. And then you have to evaluate everybody on an individual basis. So through that process, we've really grown incrementally, but we have a pretty highly functioning team. And now, one more thing that I'd say about that is you cannot ignore the fact that your team has to function together. So as you're looking for as you're looking for additional skill sets, you can't just hire the person that has the most GIS experience, because GIS is something that you're short on. You really have to think about how that person is going to work with everybody else, how they're going to grow and help others grow. So how they're going to share their knowledge so that they're not the only person that understands GIS. All these things are things that you have to factor in when you're trying to grow your analytics shop and your data shop, your data team.
That's a great response. Thank you. There's just a couple more questions. I'm not sure we'll have time for everything with just 5 minutes left. Let's try, here's one from Mark Keith Pilot. How have you dealt with the concerns of coworkers who would rather not share data because of worries about how that data might be misinterpreted?
Great question. So interpreting data is something that we have to really consider as we're creating these open data sets. Metadata is just a big fancy term to say a description about what you're seeing, right? So when you're thinking about creating data sets, you have to make sure that every single element within that data set is fully explained so that people understand what they're looking at. I'll give you an example. So when we were generating our EV data set, the term EV, electric vehicle, that was something we went around and around on. So people use that term and not everybody means the same thing. No, so on one hand, some people might think an EV is a fully electric vehicle, which means they run off of a battery and they don't need any gas. Others might include hybrids because they have the ability to use electricity, but they also use gas. So how do we handle that? We can't change everybody's definition in the world, but what we can do is tell you what our definition is. So when you go to our EV data set and you're wondering what you're looking at, you can hover over the field that you're curious about and you will see a little bit about what you're looking at. And as you're delving into the data set, you can look at the field definitions and you know exactly what you're looking at, what's included, what's excluded, and all that. So we want to make sure that we fully explain what's being shared, and then as long as that's done, at some point you have to let it go and let people interpret and hope that what you've provided gives them enough information to make to interpret it correctly.
Thank you very much. We are at 11:58, and there's still a couple more questions. Paul, is there any sort of wrap up you'd like to do? Maybe we can take down those questions and follow up. I'm happy to transcribe those.
Yeah, my only, thank you, Andy. Yeah, and thank you, Sadeeq. My only wrap up was just to promote the link to the remaining sessions, and also to just say that a lot of the privacy and PII concerns that Sadeeq had was discussing today is a perfect segue for this Friday's session when we're going to be talking about open data privacy. And we have some great panelists from the City of Seattle, King County Privacy, and as well as the Future of Privacy Forum. So that's all I wanted to say, is just to kind of push the remaining sessions, and to just give a huge thank you to Sadeeq and his team and the inspiring work that they do for the state of Washington and for all of us who live here, and for sharing their time today. I know this is a very busy time for this team. It's the legislative session, and they have really dug deep to come and spend time with us today. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure, and I encourage everybody to make it to as many of those sessions as you can and to get going on your open data journey. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks everybody. We will talk to you on Friday. All right, have a good week. Bye-bye.